Welcome to Look Ahead Radio with Tom Arms and Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. As a matter of fact, it's actually viewpoints around the world. And today, this is an important story to talk about. We've got, of course, Tom Arms joining us from LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio, where he is situated in London, England. And I'm looking forward to finding out what's happening in the European community as a result of the pandemic. And with that, Tom, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us as always.
Thank you for asking me, Lockwood, and good afternoon to you.
And my question to you, of course, you are now some 4 hours ahead of us. You're about to celebrate that opportunity to actually change time. You're going to also have daylight savings time. It's amazing how we are, as humans, can alter time. So when do you change to daylight savings again?
This Saturday at midnight.
This Saturday. Okay. So then we go back to a 5-hour differential. And by the way, this portion of the program has been pre-recorded to accommodate Tom's sleeping schedule, since as it's airing live here on the talk station, he will be soundly sleeping. Tom, let's talk first about the weather there in London. By the way, I can see by my video of you, which is a little frightening, that you've got sunlight streaming into your office.
Lockwood, I have more than sunlight. I've got the curtains drawn. It is bright blue skies. Spring has sprung. The cherry blossoms are out. And it's beautiful. We were sitting in the hammock yesterday.
Okay, so this is spring weather for you. This is pleasant weather.
Yeah, it's about 60 degrees. Okay. It's not hot by any means. But, it's very pleasant.
And with that pleasant outdoor feeling, my question to you goes to, are you able to enjoy the outdoors in light of the pandemic?
We're able to enjoy our garden.
Okay.
And we are blessed with a particularly large garden for London, which, due to the pandemic, we've decided to turn half of the lawn over to digging for victory. And we're going to be out there this weekend digging up the lawn to prepare it for vegetables. Okay,
a lot of people are not aware of the digging for victory. Let's talk about that. World War II, as a matter of fact.
That's right, yep. During World War II, everyone was encouraged to go out and dig up their lawns and plant vegetables so that the country didn't have to import so many. In fact, it couldn't because of the impact on shipping. And effectively, now that it's difficult to get to the shops, and there might, in fact, be a bottleneck in terms of importing food from overseas as well at some stage, I think it's time to start digging for victory again.
That's an interesting issue, and we'll talk about this for a few moments because, of course, the UK, an island country, the Great Britain, that is, the United Kingdom is much larger than just the island of England. But let's talk here first about the impact on you, and we're not going to go into a lot of the details of the reason, HIPAA regulations, but you are, of course, in the process of recovering from cancer. Let's talk about the experience that you're having personally there with your abilities to travel outside the home and your family. What is the current status of, if you will, restrictions, the quarantine aspect?
None of us can travel outside the house, full stop. My son, my wife, and I are all living here on separate floors, trying to keep to our floors as much as possible, 6 feet apart, not touching each other, trying not to touch things that other people in the household have touched. We are in strict self-quarantine. Nobody is allowed into the house. And it's basically all for my benefit because I suffer from a chronic blood cancer. In normal course of events, I could go on for years and years and years, but it makes me very susceptible to any infection, and so we have to be very careful. We can go out into our back garden. We can, walk out the front door, but no more than a couple feet. Any packages that come into the house that are delivered by the postman or by Amazon or anyone, we have to wait 24 hours before we can open them.
Now, Tom, let's talk here about the issue of packages and things of this nature. You're obviously looking at having to receive your groceries by courier of some fashion. What is the status of, for example, food products? Do you have to do something with those products before you can consume?
Yes, we're supposed to wait 24 hours before we can touch them.
Wow. Okay. Is this a recommendation from the government or from your doctors? How is this all being?
Both.
Okay, both. All right. We're going to talk then let's talk about the expanse and the of the events there in the United Kingdom, but particularly in London and around the island nation of England. What about what's happening in London?
Well, London is the worst hit within the UK. It's all big cities are the ones where it's centered. I mean, in America, it's centered on New York, and Italy, it's centered on Milan, and France, it's centered on Paris. Whenever you get a lot of people together, they're going to rub together and they're going to spread germs. The problem is that you want to keep things running. They have reduced the underground, that is the subway system, or the tube, as it's called here. They've reduced the number of trains by 1/3, or 2/3, sorry. They've reduced them by 2/3, number of buses by 2/3. But people are still going to work, and the trains are just as crowded because there's so few of them.
Oh, yeah, and of course you're trying to keep that social distance. Tom,
which is impossible on the trains.
All right, Tom.
And so they may have to reintroduce, more trains back onto them,
right,
back onto the tracks, so that people can go ahead with the social distancing. There's been a lot of criticism of the public in general not adhering to the social distancing rules. And they've started putting the police on the streets to tell them 6 feet apart, come on now, do as you're told. And if that doesn't work, they're going to start fining them.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So
they're talking about maybe a $50 fine, and if that doesn't work, increasing it even more.
Tom, again, Tom Arms with us of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio, talking to us from London, England. Tom, I was talking with someone the other day, actually yesterday, about Washington, D.C., and he commented that the city was pretty much deserted. Many of the normal businesses, restaurants, things of this nature, retail facilities are closed. What about there in London? With all the people that you're telling me on the public transit system, sounds to me like there's a lot of business still operating in London.
The businesses have been closed down, except for pharmacies, that's drugstores.
Mm-hmm.
I think the DIY shops are still open. Basically anything that's considered essential, but all the restaurants, bars, clubs, gyms, any retail shops, clothes shops, all those have been closed. They've been shut down completely.
So, do you have traffic?
Restaurants that can do takeaway services,
right,
are still operating with takeaway services.
Okay, but it sounds to me like there's still a lot of traffic on the streets then. How come?
No, there's not that much. To be honest, Lockwood, I'm not on a main street.
Okay.
And so I can't really look out the window and say there's a lot of traffic, but on my little quiet street, it is even quieter.
I can appreciate that. All right. The other question, of course, goes to the impact that this is having on the economic structure there, particularly in London. Let's talk about this for about a minute and a half here before we go to the break. Lloyd's of London is really the heart of the financial institutions of not only the United Kingdom, but quite frankly, the world. Lloyd's, the insurance companies, but also a lot of finance companies. And we'll talk about this in relationship to Brexit here in a few moments. But what impact is all of this having on world world economic activities there in London?
Well, it's the same basically all over the world, that if people aren't working, then businesses aren't producing, and of course nobody's buying.
Right.
And they say in China that the pandemic led to a 20% shrinkage in the Chinese economy. And I think that you can expect even more in Europe and America. We're talking about, if you think about it, between 1929 and 1932, the American economy shrunk by 1/3. And that caused the Great Depression. That was spread over 3 years. We're talking about a similar shrinkage in the economy in Europe and America in a matter of weeks.
Okay. All right. We're going to get back to this and more in just a moment here with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. Joining us from London, England, you're listening to Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio, joining us from London, England. And yes, this portion of the program has been pre-recorded to accommodate his sleeping schedule, which he is some 4 hours after Sunday. He will be, because of mankind's ability to alter time, he will be back to 5 hours differential, because they will be saving lots of daylight there in the United Kingdom, in England. Tom, continuing on with this conversation about the economies, and I want to talk about this in relationship to Brexit, because obviously one of the great concerns with the England's exit from the European community, and we're going to talk about the future of that too as well, a variety of things to talk about. I'm curious, what has been the impact now on the Brexit negotiations? We talked about that last week. The negotiations are supposed to be continuing. Is there a sense of calm about that, is number one question. And number two, has it sort of been, as we like to say proverbially, the cans being kicked down the street? What's the future of Brexit at this point?
It's been kicked into the next dimension, I think.
Okay, I like that.
No, really, nobody's talking about Brexit. I don't know if you heard, but the chief EU negotiator, Michel Barnier, came down with coronavirus.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So it's just not being discussed at all. I think it's one of those things. It's assumed that Brexit is going to be delayed because they're having to shift resources away from planning for Brexit to coping with the pandemic.
All right, but let's talk about how the economy then is progressing in the UK, because with the elimination of the relationship, the trading relationship, is trade continuing as normal there in England?
Well, they're trying to make it continue as normal. They have restrictions, obviously, on people entering the country, just like every country now seems to. You know, borders have been closed, but they haven't been closed to freight. So ships carrying freight are still allowed in. Trains coming through the Channel Tunnel with freight are still allowed to travel normally. The delivery networks by lorry and by train are all operating normally because they are regarded as essential services. I should add, by the way, National Health Service, they've had 250,000 people volunteer to help the National Health Service.
Okay, in relationship to the pandemic, okay, let's talk about that. Related to, again, your community there in London, let's talk about how the community is responding. You mentioned a moment ago, how many, 200,000 people reaching?
250,000 people have volunteered to help the National Health Service.
Okay.
You know, they would be, cleaners and porters and things like that. Some of them are doctors and nurses who are coming out of retirement, but others are just members of the public who want to help.
All right, let's talk seems to be the activities, since everyone, the vast majority of people are basically staying in home. I don't want to use the word quarantining, but they are staying
isolating.
They're isolating. So what do people do in London and in England when they're isolating? I guess you've got the BBC. What else?
Well, we have social media. The other day, we organized a virtual bottle game on Skype.
Now, what was this, a virtual what?
We're planning a virtual dinner party, a virtual pub quiz. We're sending out messages. We've set up a WhatsApp group for our community, and we're planning a concert where everybody that can play a musical instrument will either stand in the window or open their doors, and they each have a song sheet downloaded, and they will have a street concert.
I love it. I like the idea of the virtual pub games. I think that may be the future here as well. Talking about the pubs, of course, they are all closed. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, Lockwood.
The pubs themselves are closed.
The pubs are closed.
Yeah.
Oh, they've been closed for about 10 days now.
Okay. And of course, all the games are over as well. Back to the issue of the UK. Is there any difference, for example, to what's going on in Ireland or Wales or any of the Midlands there, for example? Is there any differential the way people are responding to the pandemic?
Europe as a whole is in lockdown.
And that means then all the travel between France.
There are variations of that, but I think it's just fair to say that all of Europe is in lockdown.
All right. Then the next question goes to, how are the communities responding to the needs of the sick? And you mentioned the National Health Service, but how are you doing? Is there fear? I've seen some stories, for example, particularly New York City, for example, they're going to have to use certain facilities to treat the sick. What's happening in London? Is there any opportunity or need to utilize otherwise public facilities?
There is a big conference center called Excel, which is being turned into a medical center in the East End of London. Other than that, at the moment, the National Health Service seems to be just about coping.
Wow.
But we're in fairly early stages compared to Italy and Spain.
Which, by the way, are in a really serious situation. Let's talk about those two countries here for a few minutes, and we're going to move on to a few other items here with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio joining us from London, England. Tom, what about Spain? Is that a situation that's going to be equal to or worse than Italy?
They're saying it's going to be worse than Italy. They now have 738 deaths just in the past 24 hours.
Wow. And then what about Italy? Is there any effort? I've got to bring this up, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes. Russia has been asked to step in and assist the Italians with the recovery efforts. What about Spain? Are they looking for international assistance, and is there any available?
Well, yes, the Chinese are getting involved. They're offering their services basically because they obviously have some expertise in this area now. But they also have respirators, which, of course, they don't have as great a need for. And so they're starting to make their respirators available to the Spanish and the Italians. In Russia, it's been like a turnaround overnight.
Right.
They have elections on the 22nd of April. Those have now been postponed. And Putin, who was basically saying that this was a storm in a teacup, is now saying, "I'm sorry, it's more serious than I thought it was."
Exactly. I was surprised, and I think we discussed this briefly last week, at the lack of acknowledgement in Russia, the fact that they said they only had 300 people diagnosed with the pandemic, the epidemic, coronavirus, or as we say here, and Tom does not like this, the Wuhan, pardon me.
Wuhan. Well, we agreed to call it the virus.
The Wuhan virus. But anyhow, back to the issue. The virus. But the thing that strikes me is how Russia was, quite frankly, dishonest.
They jumped in a matter of days from 163 cases to 658. I think it's in 2 days.
Okay, so you think that that it is now reaching epidemic proportions there in Russia as well? Yes. All right. France, how are they doing, and how are they faring in this?
France has 22,304 cases last time I looked, and just over 1,000 deaths.
Okay.
Now, they've got a fairly high percentage. Germany has just about the same number of cases, 22,672, but only 86 deaths.
That says a lot about the German.
They seem to be better at coping. The
Right.
hospitals seem to be better at coping with people. It's interesting also, people are very concerned in Germany because Angela Merkel has gone into quarantine.
Right.
They're concerned that she may have picked it up.
Okay.
I forgot to mention, I don't know if you heard, that
Prince Charles
has been tested positive.
Right. I wanted to ask about that. And, of course, there's concern then possibly the exposure to the Queen and Prince Philip.
They've been isolating him from the Queen. The Queen is completely isolated.
Okay. So does this pose a concern for the British public about Prince Charles?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, you don't want the heir to the throne dying.
Well,
but it also underscores the fact that this virus is no respecter of social standing. It's no respecter of amount of money in the bank, in your bank balance.
Right.
It's no respecter of boundaries. It doesn't respect anything.
Well, you and the virus have a lot in common. We'll leave it at that. Tom Arms with us with LookAhead.com, LookAheadNews.com, LookAhead Radio.
You I don't respect.
No. It's the across the board. Tom Arms joining us this evening.
Tongue-in-cheek.
No, definitely not. This Tom Arms joining us from London, England, where, again, just to mention, he is some 4 hours ahead of us, so this portion has been pre-recorded. We'll return in just a moment right after this commercial break here on Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. We now return to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. He's joining us from London, England, where it's some 4 hours ahead of us, so this portion has been pre-recorded. We were just getting some information about the experience there in the UK and around Europe as a result of the pandemic. And we mentioned Russia just a few moments ago. You mentioned the Russian elections and coronavirus and the fact that Vladimir Putin has delayed the elections. You know, that does go to the question of the United States, and we've got elections here as well. And I'm wondering, is there much interest as to how the U.S. is coping with this situation, Tom?
Yeah, well, I mean, people over here are saying that it doesn't look as if the U.S. is coping very well with the situation. And if you take the example of New York City, where you have 25,000 cases, now, if we just look at this proportionately, 25,000 cases, a population of about 10 million, you've got fewer cases in France with a population of 70 million.
But not as compact as New York City.
No, but Paris is not very much smaller than New York City.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is that proportionately speaking, New York City is a basket case, possibly the worst. A lot of people are saying that America is on the road to being the epicenter of the virus in a matter of weeks.
Okay.
And New York may already be there.
There is some question about that, and good point. And of course, it initiated, of all places, in Washington State. You'll be interested in knowing I was talking to a microbiologist yesterday who's has a lot of expertise in chasing down the sources of virus, and she commented, of course, these viruses carry with them certain markers. She said that they have identified the source of the virus in New York City, and it is coming from a different source totally, and it has different markers, whereas the viruses on the west coast of the United States, in Washington State, definitely have the markers of the original Chinese virus, as it was originally called. So it's interesting how the U.S. is being attacked, if you will, from either coast simultaneously. The other aspect of this, and let's talk about this in relationship to the politics of it. You mentioned here, you've got a note here, the Chinese exploit political advantage. Let's talk about your observations on that. And are you talking about that in relationship to the United States or worldwide?
Worldwide, more. I think what they're doing is basically they're saying, we seem to have beaten this virus, and we did it with our political system.
Mm-hmm.
And you should use our political system if you want to defeat this virus. That's number one. Number two is, and we're going to help you. We're going to send you respirators. We're going to send you face masks. We're going to get our factories back up and running so we can make more of these respirators. We're going to provide you with financial aid. We've got a huge surplus, so forth and so on. We're going to step in. America is going to be humbled. It's going to be dragged down to its feet and its knees. It's not going to be in a position to help you because so many people are going to be sick and dying, and their political system isn't working. We can fill the political vacuum.
Interesting analysis. Tom, let's talk about how this is resonating in the European community. Do they trust the Chinese in this case?
It's a matter of life and death. You've heard the expression, better red than dead, which was so familiar in our youth.
Wow.
And, they don't have much choice. If they have to borrow money to recover from this, or to have their economies not collapse, and the Chinese are the only ones who have the money, they don't have any choice. If they have to buy respirators, they have to buy them from where they are made, where they're available. There's no choice in this matter. It's not like Huawei.
Right. Oh, okay. Of course, that has created quite a stir for the political environment, particularly in the United States.
Well, I think that's gone onto the back burner too now, hasn't it?
Oh, it has. All right. Let's talk about this in relationship to the services needed in the European community and even including there Great Britain. Obviously, food supplies, energy sources, things of this nature. What is happening? What is the solution? Because you still have to feed the people. Are the farms still operating, for example, in Europe?
Those are all essential services. They are still operating. The delivery systems are still operating. Those are all regarded as essential services, and I think they will continue to be so. We have people locally. There's not as much food as there was in the shops, but that's not because they're not getting enough delivered or that there's a break in the supply chain. It's because of panic buying.
Okay. I'm glad you brought up the panic buying because I wanted to ask you. We're having a problem in the United States. Not enough toilet paper. What about the state? What is the topic number one item being purchased there in, for example, England with panic buying?
Dry foods.
Okay.
Right. Pasta, tinned foods, things that you can stockpile in your larder or pantry for the next few months if this thing stretches out.
And what's
toilet paper? Okay. My birthday, by the way, was on Monday, and somebody gave me a roll of toilet paper as a birthday present with Donald Trump's face printed on every sheet.
Oh, hey, I'm sure you're happy about that. Here's a question for you, Tom. Let's talk about the experience in these stores? Are they restricting access to or somehow monitoring?
And they're setting up special time. They're extending the opening hours.
Uh-huh.
They're hiring a lot of people. So those people who might be out of work from their restaurants are being hired by the supermarkets to stack shelves.
Wow.
People are being hired to stand outside the supermarkets to maintain order and to make sure that everybody's standing 6 feet apart. Only 10 people are being allowed into the shop at a time. And they're having special opening hours for elderly.
Now, is this the same across Europe? Are they doing the same thing in other countries that you know of?
It's different countries have slightly different rules, but generally speaking, yes.
Okay.
And even within those countries, like in Germany, you have lots of different. It's a federal structure, so the landowner or the states are much more involved in restrictions. But generally, some sort of rules apply across Europe.
Let's talk here for a moment, Tom, and this is not really on our agenda, but you have some broad information on this, I'm confident. The impacts on Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, Iran, and, of course, Syria. And the question goes to, the unrest in those countries. Has this pandemic altered, if you will, the military and political landscape in those countries?
Well, it has to at some stage. Iran has confirmed cases of 24,000. That figure is incredibly suspect. It could easily be 500,000 already in Iran.
Wow.
And they do not have the medical facilities. And that is the problem in places like Iran, Afghanistan, all throughout Africa, India. India has just imposed a total lockdown on all 1.3 billion. And again, they don't have the medical facilities. They're not geared up for it. They just don't have the hospitals. And so I think, it's going to have a huge impact on their populations, and the governments whose always their first responsibility is the protection of life, are going to get the blame.
All right. And of course, the political fallout on this we a little premature to even get involved.
We can't say we can't say details what the political fallout will be. It could result in people saying, "Oh, we need a more liberal government because the liberal governments did this," or they could say, "We need a more authoritarian government like the Chinese." You just don't know.
All right, Tom. Speaking of this in relationship to Iran, it is stunning the number of people that have the disease in Iran. Why is that? We've mentioned Spain, of course, because quite frankly they were late to responding to the virus. Italy, which was which became the hotspot initially for Europe, and because there's a large Chinese population in northern Italy, I might add, I've got to make mention of that. But why Iran? That is a surprise to me.
Well, let's go look at the cultures of Spain and Italy. One of the reasons they have a problem, I'll come to Iran, is because of the culture of families staying at home, in the family home, much longer.
Right.
Both men and women stay with their parents until they're married. And so, you get this living together much more closely in apartments. It's perfect for the spread of something like this. In Iran, it's a very religious culture. And it's taken them a long time to start banning Friday prayers, to start banning visits to the holy city of Qum. And of course, the Shiite religion is at the very core of the political structure of the country. And so they don't want to put restrictions on religious worship because they fear it might have an impact on the politics.
So then the question is, you mentioned Iran does not have the facilities. You mentioned India a few moments ago. Obviously, Iran still suffering from the political fallout from the elimination of the nuclear accord, and they, as a country, have been quarantined. What is the future for Iran? Are they getting assistance of Syria, for example, Iraq, Saudi Arabia?
They get assistance from China.
China. Okay.
By the way, I should mention another country, Bangladesh. Again, a cultural thing. They had a rally about 5 or 6 days ago for 20,000 Muslims, a religious rally.
Wow. Okay.
Now that's just drawing. That's madness.
Well, it is now a fact. Let's talk here then about Saudi Arabia, and we've got to bring in the issue of oil, and then we'll take a quick break. But Saudi Arabia, of course, has locked down as well. What's happening to the whole energy sector there? Predominantly,
well, the oil prices are dropping, but that's not really affecting the Saudi economy. They're sitting pretty. In a way, the more that the energy prices drop, the better it is for the Saudis, because they have a very high profit margin, because it costs very little to extract oil from the Saudi sands.
Okay, I've got to go.
It costs a lot to extract it from the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of Angola or Nigeria.
Okay, let's talk about that in relationship to Russia. Russia, of course, now facing an awareness on the epidemic, as you just pointed out a few moments ago. Vladimir Putin, who's now given himself an additional 12 years to serve, and beyond, if he so desires, I guess. And
he still has to have that vote.
Oh, he has not had the vote yet?
No, that was going to be on the 22nd of April.
Oh, and that, of course, has been delayed. All right. The question I have is, what happens to Russia in light of the fact that their economy is not that strong, and this oil, this oil competition is hurting their economy even more? What's the future?
Well, again, it's a difficult time. I mean, Putin has been basically working very hard at projecting himself as the savior of Russia.
Yeah.
As a cult figure, really.
Mm-hmm.
And if this happens and the price of oil keeps dropping, Russia can't afford that, being, I think, the world's second largest oil producer. And it costs a lot of money to get oil out of the Caucasus region.
Well, it's going to be interesting.
I'll be honest, I don't know.
Oh, well,
I have no idea.
It is
result in Putin being overthrown, but by what?
I know.
There's nothing waiting in the wings. He managed to suppress all opposition.
Well, the fascinating thing about this, Tom, and we'll talk about this at a length later, is how this virus could totally alter the political landscape of the world. That's the topic we'll have to talk about in the near term.
The political, the economic, the
right.
social, cultural, it's affecting every aspect of our lives. And it's all up in the air, and we don't know where the cards are going to come down.
As the curse goes, we live in interesting times. You're listening to, and we are.
That's Chinese.
Is it Chinese or is it Irish?
Or maybe it's Wuhan.
Oh, maybe Wuhan. Oh, right up there with the virus. You're listening to Viewpoints Around the World. Thank you very much, Tom. Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio with us. We'll wrap things up. We've got a topic coming up, the Corona Sportscast. I'm going to be interested in this. Stay tuned for more here on Viewpoints Around the World.
Look Ahead Radio will return in just a moment. Welcome back to Look Ahead Radio. Here is Lockwood Phillips.
Viewpoints Around the World with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. Joining us from London, England, where it's some 4 hours ahead of us as we begin this program. So we are pre-recording this, and he is soundly sleeping, I'm sure, safely in his abode there in London, where he has been quarantined. Tom, question for you before I get to the Corona Sportscast. Has there been any indication of the length of time that you're expecting to have this period of isolation? We're looking here 15 days. However, our schools now have been extended beyond that for a full month. My question, that's school closures.
I think that's what that great American scientist Donald Trump has said, isn't it?
Well, no.
Has a fantastic degree in public health.
Well, he does.
Whereas Anthony Fauci, if I pronounce that correctly, says don't be so optimistic.
Well, we've got to be optimistic.
Reports just like you do. The politicians would like this to be over in a matter of months, maybe 2 or 3 months. They have guaranteed salaries, 80% of salaries, up to about $3,000 a month for every working person.
Wow.
For the next 3 months.
Okay, so they're looking at a 3-month period.
Scientists say this could be with us for a very long time, and they're not saying how long.
Our guest, also known as Eeyore, never really happy about the future, is Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio. Well, it's nice to have a goal, even if it seems a little premature and hard to reach.
If the goal becomes a concrete plan,
it's not a concrete plan.
I mean, to suggest, for instance, that people should pack the churches at Easter.
Well, he's hoping. He's hoping. And in some instances, as a matter of fact, listening to Dr. Fauci last evening, he commented that in some regions of the country, that is very possible. The difference is we have such a broad area in the United States with different varieties of environments. So, and I think the possibility is there, Tom. I am also intrigued, and your politicians are saying 3 months there in the UK.
They're planning economically for about 3 months.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, hey, listen, that's a goal. Let's talk here as we wrap things up with you about the Corona Sportscast. What is this about?
Well, this is actually one of my neighbors just down the road. A chap by the name of Nick Heath. His job is a sportscaster for rugby games. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, there are no rugby games taking place, and he's quarantined. And he's quarantined overlooking a busy road. And so he's decided to put up a YouTube cast in which he basically sportscasts the people that are walking down the street. Like, I can see her now. She's turning right. Nope. She's only thinking about turning right. Nope. She's turning. She's making a 90-degree turn. Oh, no, she stopped. Anyway, it has become a huge hit. It's got millions and millions of views, and it's being repeated around the world by unemployed sportscasters who are going to YouTube to do Spanish and Italian and French versions of what Nick Heath started here in Wandsworth, in London. And it's really quite amusing. If you go to YouTube and just do YouTube coronavirus sportscaster, you can hear it now in almost any language, anywhere around the world, and they're very, very amusing.
Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio with us. Tom, as always, thank you very much. Stay out of the public view, not only for your health, but for the health of others as well. We won't go into that, but it's always a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Lockwood.
Viewpoints around the world with Tom Arms of LookAheadNews.com and Look Ahead Radio.
Look Ahead Radio is a production of the Talk Station.